Welcome to Supply Chain Stories, the podcast that explores the fascinating world of supply chains and how they impact our everyday lives. I'm your host, Brittany Davis, and in today's episode, we're diving deep into a supply chain problem that has disrupted industries around the globe. Semiconductor chip shortages, with a particular focus on how they affected Ford vehicles. Let's start with our guest, Solomon. How are you doing? Tell us how you were affected with the supply chain shortage.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Salomon Lopez, and like many of you, I had my eye on a Ford F Series in 2020, and I quickly noticed that the local Ford dealership had limited vehicle options, and the ones that were available came with the price tags that were well above market value.
The culprit behind these vehicle shortages? Semiconductor chip shortages. These chips have become essential components in nearly every product we use today, from laptops, phones, game consoles, appliances, to cars. Numerous semiconductor chips are used within vehicles to manage an array of functions. To understand why semiconductor chips have been so difficult to obtain, we'll delve into the complex world of chip manufacturing and the global supply chain.
Semiconductor chips are incredibly diverse, serving various purposes across industries. This diversity makes the chip shortage more challenging. One key point to understand is that it doesn't take a shortage of all chips to disrupt production. For instance, Ford uses 1,700 chips in its F 150 series. But if just one of them is in short supply, the entire process can come to a halt. This happens with Ford a lot, leaving them to have somewhat partially of vehicles in their store until the chips become available.
Right, not to mention leading them to leave 1.3 million unsold cars and lots, 4 million employee workdays, and over $3 billion profit loss. So, to understand the origins of the chip shortage, we need to go back to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ford's initial risk management strategy led to a reduction and the cancellation of chip orders, which anticipated decline in vehicle demand due to the pandemic. Contrary to these expectations, a surge in demand for electronic devices such as laptops, gaming systems, and appliances occurred as people transitioned to working and learning remotely and spending more time at home. Automakers realized this too late, that they needed more chips to meet the renewed demand. And once they realized this, they were on the end of the supply line, the perfect black swan event.
The process of making chips is complex, involving various stages in an intricate supply chain that spans multiple countries. This complexity, combined with specific requirements for chip production, presents numerous opportunities for disruption. Let's talk about the manufacturing process.
Is the primary raw material used for semiconductor chips. The journey of silicon from its raw form to a semiconductor in a Ford vehicle involves several steps, starting with sourcing. High purity quartz, a key raw material for producing silicon, is sourced from mines around the world. Countries like the U.S, Brazil, and Norway, often shipped overseas as the most cost effective. Where the quartz is then processed and refined into metallurgical grade silicon, this often happens in countries with access to cheaper energy sources, since this process is energy intensive. China, for example, is a major player in this part of the supply chain. The silicon is further purified into polysilicon, which serves as the foundational material for semiconductor grade silicon wafers. Leading producers of polysilicon include the U.S, South Korea, Germany, and again, as I mentioned, China. Also, using maritime transport is the most cost effective and not as delicate during this stage. Polysilicon is processed into ingots and sliced into thin wafers. The top producers of semiconductor wafers are located in regions like Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. These wafers are then shipped to foundries by sea or air depending on the location. Across the world, where they are turned into semiconductor chips, some of the largest foundries are in Taiwan, South Korea, and China.
So, how are these chips shipped?
From Asia, chips typically travel by sea or air freight. Upon reaching the U.S, West Coast ports like LA, Los Angeles, or East Coast ports like Newark are common entry points. From there, a combination of rail and truck transport delivers the chips to Ford assembly plants.
Raw material and earlier production of chips are usually shipped overseas for cost efficiency, but later in the process, given the fragile nature of the chips, air freight is preferred for its speed and reduced handling, minimizing the risk of damage and ensuring swift supply to meet manufacturing demands. The exact air routes will depend on the location of the foundries, the availability of direct flights, and the geographic location of the destination manufacturing plants. Right. So if the Ford supply chain management and transportation modes isn't confusing enough, let's talk about the factors attributing to the chip shortage. The U.S. China trade warfare, which intensified during the Trump administration, involved the U.S. imposing tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese products, and China responding with its own set of tariffs. This trade conflict increased the cost of production and spilled over into the semiconductor industry in several ways.
The U.S. Department of Commerce placed restrictions on Chinese technology firms by adding them to the entity list, limiting their ability to purchase chips and components from U.S. companies without government approval. This was particularly significant for companies like Huawei and the SMIC Corporation. Anticipating further restrictions and disruptions, Chinese companies as well as firms in other countries that rely on chips produced in or through China began stockpiling semiconductors. This was a defensive move to ensure that they had adequate supplies in case of further trade restrictions or sanctions. The stockpiling led to a sudden surge in demand. While the supply was limited due to production constraints and tariffs, this mismatch was one of the factors that led to a global shortage. Long-term R&D and production expansion plans were also affected as companies became cautious about investigating new technology or production facilities amidst the uncertainty of the trade environment. In response to this uncertainty, companies began to double book orders to ensure they would have enough supply, often placing orders with multiple suppliers. This right here created an artificial demand as companies ordered more than they needed, betting that at least some orders would be filled. Suppliers faced with an increased volume of orders often could not differentiate between genuine demand spikes and precautionary double bookings.
How did economic policies affect the chip shortage, Solomon?
Lines in semiconductor production, partly due to the Made in China 2025 initiative, then intensified, affecting global trade flows. China's investment in semiconductor manufacturing capacity surged, but new facilities take 3 to 5 years to become operational, and thus in the short term, this investment did not alleviate the chip shortage. And let's not forget that China views Taiwan's sovereignty claims as rebellious, stemming from historical conflicts and different political systems. This stance has led to strained cross-strait trade relations, impacting agreement and the flow of chip goods, with China being a producer and major consumer, while Taiwan, home to TSMC, leads in advanced chip manufacturing.
Social factors included strict COVID-19 containment measures, which led to temporary factory shutdowns and reduced workforce availability, hampering production. There was also a social shift towards remote work and increased reliance on technology, spiking demand. Several other disruptions, such as the Renas Japanese conductor fire, severe weather conditions, and the Texas power outage, affected production capacity. The COVID-related port closure in Ningbo, China, along with labor shortages due to unions and specific shipping container requirements, left ports like LA, Long Beach, and Oakland clogged. The complex supply chain chips led to unanticipated shortages when multiple industries depended on the same chip manufacturers. What was the impact?
Storm partially built cars until chips became available, and the significant cut in production we already talked about. They removed some features like satellite navigation, auto start and stop, heated wheel steering, parking assist in some of the models. They also shifted to build to order with a bank 7 times more than pre-shortage. Ford started new scenario planning strategies and collaborating directly with semiconductor suppliers for improved forecasting and predictive maintenance. no longer relying solely on Tier 1 suppliers, with a focus on domestic manufacturers like their non-binding partnership with global foundries.
Finally, the discussion underscores the importance of diversifying chip production, especially as consolidation occurs in the industry, and how it can impact innovation. In conclusion, the chip shortage has highlighted the intricacies and vulnerabilities of supply chains that underpin modern technology. It is a reminder that even the smallest component in a complex system can have a significant impact on the products we rely on daily. The chip shortage isn't over yet, and its ramifications continue to ripple across various industries. As we navigate the supply chain challenge, we'll keep you updated with more supply chain stories and insights. Thanks for tuning in to Supply Chain Stories, and stay curious.